Maya Chen slouched in her seat at the back of the Galactic University's Advanced Xenobiology lecture hall, trying her best not to roll her eyes as another classmate droned on about their homeworld's supposedly fearsome predators. The massive amphitheater, designed to accommodate species of all sizes and environmental needs, hummed with a gentle whir of atmospheric processors maintaining different comfort zones for each species. The crystalline being currently presenting, who looked like a walking chandelier with too many opinions, was explaining how their world's most dangerous hunter could dissolve its prey's exoskeleton in exactly 3.4 seconds. Maya stifled a yawn. Back on Earth, that would barely qualify as a decent sea cucumber. Professor Zixilk, a towering mass of shifting purple tentacles crowned with 5 eyes, bobbed appreciatively at the presentation. "Excellent analysis, Trexa. The chemical composition of your world's apex predator is truly remarkable." The professor's tentacles rippled in what Maya had learned was their species' equivalent of scholarly excitement. Oh, the irony of that student's name. If they only knew what a real T-Rex was, Maya thought, fighting back a snicker. And so it went on. She glanced around the lecture hall at her classmates, 3 gaseous beings contained in environmental suits, a cluster of insectoids that reminded her of praying mantises, if praying mantises wore tiny glasses, and carried data tablets, and various other species that would have made headlines back on Earth. Here, she was the exotic one, the only human in the entire Galactic University's current semester. A mixture of morality and philosophy. People really plummeted for magic. Now then? Professor Zexilk's melodic voice resonated through the hall's universal translator. Who can tell me why Class 4 worlds tend to produce such efficiently lethal predators? Their eyes swiveled independently, scanning the room but notably skipping over Maya's corner. A gelatinous blob near the front, Blorp, Maya had never managed to pronounce their actual name, rippled the surface in the universal gesture for raising a hand. Because Class 4 environments require specialized hunting mechanisms to overcome the inherent atmospheric and gravitational challenges? Maya asked. Maya shrugged. The problem is that it can be hard to get one's own specialized hunting mechanisms to overcome the inherent atmospheric and gravitational challenges? Precisely. The professor's tentacles performed what Maya had dubbed the academic wiggle, which is why it's so fascinating to have students from such diverse evolutionary backgrounds in our program. Each of your worlds has produced unique solutions to the challenge of survival. Maya bit her lip as several of her classmates turned to give her what they probably thought were subtle glances. She knew what they were thinking. She'd heard it all before. Humans came from Earth, a Class 12 Deathworld, yet they looked so soft. No claws, no natural armor, no acid glands, not even basic bioluminescence, just smooth skin and dull teeth. How had they ever survived? The crystalline being Trerexa chimed melodiously, their species' version of clearing their throat. Professor, I've been curious. How did species from lower-class worlds like Earth develop sophisticated space travel without the evolutionary advantages that come from a more challenging environment? Maya's hand tightened around her stylus. There it was, the daily dose of condescension wrapped in academic curiosity. Professor Zexilk's tentacles rippled in what might have been discomfort. Well, that's quite a complex topic. Perhaps we should focus on today's lesson about chemical-based predation strategies. But surely it's relevant, Thorexa persisted, their crystalline structure refracting light in patterns that Maya had learned indicated smug satisfaction. Understanding how less advantaged species compensate for their evolutionary deficits could provide valuable insights into adaptation mechanisms. The stylus in Maya's hand creaked dangerously. Less advantaged? Evolutionary deficits? Oh, if they only knew about the things that had shaped human evolution. Like sharks. A smile crept across her face as she thought about Earth's perfect predator, still swimming the oceans after hundreds of millions of years. Professor Zigzilk must have noticed her expression because all 5 eyes suddenly focused on her. "Student Chen, you seem to have something to add to the discussion." The entire class turned to look at her, some using eye stalks, others rotating entire sections of their bodies. Maya straightened in her seat, her smile widening. "Finally. Actually, Professor, I was just thinking about some of Earth's predators. You know, from my soft, low-class world?" She kept her voice sweet, but there was an edge to it that made a few of the more perceptive students shift uncomfortably in their seats. The professor's tentacles twisted in what might have been concern or curiosity. "Oh, would you care to share an example?" Maya's grin turned predatory. "Well, since we're on the topic of chemical predation and evolutionary advantages, why don't I tell you about something we call a shark?" She sniffed in disgust. Teryx's crystalline structure vibrated in what Maya had come to recognize as their version of a patronizing laugh. "A shark? Is that some kind of primitive reptilian creature?" "Oh no," Maya replied, her voice dripping with honey-sweet sarcasm. "Sharks aren't primitive at all. They're actually one of Earth's most successful evolutionary stories, been around for about 450 million years. The gaseous beings in their environmental suits exchanged glows that Maya interpreted as skepticism. One of them, Zesk, released a small puff of neon green gas, their species equivalent of a scoff. "Surely any species that ancient must be extremely simple," Zez burbled through their translator. "On our world, the most successful predators are the ones that evolved most recently, utilizing complex molecular manipulation and psychic warfare." Maya couldn't help it, she laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-bodied human laugh that echoed through the lecture hall. Several of her classmates recoiled at the unfamiliar sound, and one of the praying mantis students nearly dropped their data tablet. "Tu-gan. Student smiled and swept his fingers to help uproot curtains. "Perhaps you could explain what you find so amusing about evolutionary biology." A singular shape of scarlet, Maya wiped a tear from her eye, still grinning. "I'm sorry, Professor. It's just, everyone here seems to think that newer means better, or that complexity equals superiority. But sharks? They're perfect just the way they are. They haven't needed to change much because they got it right the first time." "Got what right?" Terexa chimed dismissively. "How sophisticated could these sharks be? Do they manipulate gravitational fields, deploy electromagnetic pulses, compress space-time?" The praying mantis students were now frantically taking notes, their tiny glasses glinting in the artificial light. Maya noticed one of them had drawn what they apparently thought a shark might look like. It had tentacles and looked suspiciously like a space squid. "No," Maya replied, standing up. "They don't need any of that. What they have is much better." She walked down to the front of the lecture hall, her footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet space. "Professor, would you mind if I gave a short presentation? I think my classmates might benefit from learning about one of Earth's apex predators." Professor Zibzilk's eyes swiveled independently, studying Maya with obvious curiosity. "While this is somewhat off our planned curriculum," 4 of their eyes turned to look at the clearly invested class, while the 5th remained fixed on Maya. "I suppose a comparative xenobiology demonstration could be educational?" Maya pulled out her datapad and connected it to the holographic projector. "Oh, it will be educational, all right." She grinned, showing her flat, herbivore-like teeth in what she knew her classmates considered a non-threatening display. If only they knew that on Earth it was often the sight of human teeth that signaled the beginning of trouble. "Before I start," Maya said, turning to face the class, "I should probably warn you that some of this footage might be a bit intense. We humans sometimes forget that other species aren't used to our world's wildlife. Blorp quivered indignantly near the front row. We are advanced xenobiology students. Student Chen, I hardly think anything from a Class 12 world could disturb us. Terex's crystalline form sparkled in agreement. Indeed. We've studied the most lethal predators from across the galaxy. How dangerous could these sharks of yours possibly be? Maya's smile widened as she pulled up the first image. A great white shark breaching the water's surface, its massive jaws wide open, sunlight glinting off rows of serrated teeth. The entire class fell silent. Well, Maya said cheerfully, why don't you judge for yourself? Ha! The collective gasp that rippled through the lecture hall was almost comical. Blorp's gelatinous form had lost some of its cohesion, creating small puddles beneath their desk. The praying mantis students were frantically erasing their previous drawings, mandibles clicking in agitation. This, Maya said, gesturing to the frozen image of the breaching great white, is Carcharodon carcharias, what we call a great white shark. And before anyone asks, yes, those are all teeth you're seeing, and yes, they regrow them continuously throughout their lives. As crystalline form had lost some of its previous luster. How large is this creature? Maya's grin grew wider. Oh, this one's actually pretty average. About 6 meters long. The largest confirmed great white was around 8 meters, though we suspect they can grow bigger. 8 meters. Professor Zigzog's tentacles had gone slightly pale. And these are current Earth creatures, not extinct ones. Current? Maya laughed. There are probably thousands swimming in Earth's oceans right now, but here's the really fun part. They're not even close to being the largest sharks we have. The whale shark can grow up to 18 meters long. The gaseous being's environmental suits fogged up simultaneously. One of them, presumably Zach, spoke up. But surely these larger ones are less aggressive, perhaps herbivorous. The whale shark. Oh yeah, they're gentle filter feeders. Maya nodded, then clicked to the next slide showing a megalodon-sized comparison. But their extinct cousin, the megalodon, now that was something else. Imagine a shark the size of this lecture hall with a bite force strong enough to crush a small spacecraft. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The praying mantis group had huddled together, their tiny glasses fogging up in distress. But size isn't what makes sharks truly remarkable, Maya continued, clicking to the next slide. It's their senses. Everyone here talks about sophisticated hunting mechanisms. Well, let me tell you about electroreception. She pulled up a diagram of the ampullae of Lorenzini. Sharks can detect electrical impulses as faint as 5/1 billionths of a volt. That's like sensing a battery from the other side of your home planet. They can literally feel your heartbeat from meters away. Impossible, Terex examined, their crystal structure vibrating in disbelief. No biological system could be that sensitive without massive electromagnetic shielding. Oh, but it gets better, Maya grinned. They can also sense blood and water from up to a kilometer away. Their sense of smell is so acute that they can detect 1 drop of blood in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. What's an Olympic-sized swimming pool? One of the mantis students squeaked. About 2.5 million liters of water, Maya replied casually. Professor Zaxel's tentacles had tied themselves into what looked like a sailor's knot. Student Chin, are you suggesting that these creatures combine extreme size with multi-spectrum sensory capabilities and regenerating weapon systems? Don't forget their skin, Maya added cheerfully. It's covered in tiny, tooth-like scales called dermal denticles that reduce drag so effectively that we copy the pattern for our high-speed water vessels. Oh, and some species can swim at speeds of up to 56 kilometers per hour. Blorf had now completely lost their shape and was slowly seeping between the floor tiles. One of the mantis students had pulled out what appeared to be a comfort blanket. But here's my favorite part, Maya said, pulling up a new hologram. This is what humans do for. The image showed a cage diving expedition, with tourists gleefully taking pictures of a great white swimming past their protective cage. The entire class erupted in chaos. 2 of the gaseous beings fainted, their environmental suits automatically engaging emergency stabilizers. Trex's crystal structure emitted a high-pitched ringing sound that shattered a nearby drink. The Mantis students had gone into a group meditation pose, possibly trying to deny reality. Student Chen. Professor Zixok managed to say, their voice trembling slightly, "Are you telling us that humans voluntarily place themselves in close proximity to these creatures for entertainment?" Maya shrugged. "Well, yeah, we even have an entire week of television dedicated to them. We call it Shark Week. It's pretty popular, a week of sharks." The professor's tentacles had begun to develop stress knots. "Oh yes," Maya said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "But that's nothing compared to what some researchers do. Want to see the footage of people free diving with great whites? No protective cage, just regular swimming." The sound of Krzyzanka fainting and hitting the floor with a crystalline tinkle was almost lost amid the collective screams of horror. Once the medical drones had finished reviving Krzyzanka and stabilizing the gaseous students, Professor Zixok managed to restore some semblance of order to the classroom, though Maya noticed with amusement. They had retreated behind their desk as if it might offer protection from the holographic sharks. Perhaps, the professor suggested weakly, we should move on to a less intensive topic. "Oh, but I haven't even gotten to the cool part yet," Maya protested, bouncing slightly on her toes. "I haven't told them about the different species. Did you know we have over 500 known species of sharks?" The praying mantis students, who had just begun to lower their comfort blankets, immediately pulled them back up. One of them was writing what appeared to be a last will and testament on their data pad. 500? Blurp bubbled weakly from their puddle on the floor. "Yup. And they all have different hunting specialties," Maya continued cheerfully. "Like the thresher shark, it uses its tail like a whip to stun prey, or the goblin shark, which can project its jaws out of its face to catch." She pulled up an image of a goblin shark feeding. 3 more students fainted. Student Chen, Professor Zaxik intervened. Their tentacles now so knotted, they resembled a macram project. Surely these creatures must be rare. Perhaps confined to specific regions? Maya shook her head, pulling up a holographic globe of Earth. "Nope, sharks live in all of Earth's oceans. From the freezing poles to the tropical equator, from the surface," she paused for dramatic effect, "to the deepest trenches. We're still discovering new species in the deep ocean. Who knows what's down there? Who knows what's down there?" Terexes are repeated faintly, their crystalline structure vibrating with horror. "You mean you share a planet with these beings and you don't even know all of them?" "Well, we've only explored about 5 of our oceans thoroughly," Maya explained. "The rest is, let's say, a work in progress." Zach's environmental suit released a small puff of what smelled suspiciously like fear pheromones. "And your species achieved spaceflight while sharing a planet with these apex predators." "Oh, sharks aren't apex predators," Maya said casually. The entire class froze. Even the medical drones stopped their hovering to process this statement. "Not apex predators." Professor Zixok's voice had risen several octaves. "Nope," Maya grinned. "In fact, there's only one known predator that regularly hunts great white sharks." She paused, enjoying the mounting tension. "Orcas. We call them killer whales, though they're actually dolphins. They hunt great whites in groups, flip them upside down to induce a state of paralysis, and then, well, let's just say it's not the shark's best day." She pulled up footage of an orca pod hunting. The mantis students had begun praying in earnest now, their antennae twitching in perfect synchronization. "But here's what I find really interesting," Maya continued, warming to her subject. "Despite all this, sharks aren't even close to being the most dangerous predators on Earth. They're actually quite predictable once you understand their behavior. That's why we can swim with them." "You keep saying that." Terexa managed to chime weakly. "But surely only specially trained individuals would attempt such a..." Maya pulled up images of tourist operations around the world. "Nope, anyone can do it. You just need a basic safety briefing and some common sense. Look, here's a popular spot in Australia where you can dive with great whites. And here's one in South Africa where they practically guarantee shark sightings." Guarantee sightings. Blorp had begun to evaporate slightly from stress. "Oh yeah. Sometimes the tour operators even use special chum mixtures to attract them closer to the boats. You know, for better photos." The collective gasp of horror was so strong it set off the lecture hall's atmospheric pressure alarm. You deliberately attract them. Professor Zexelk's voice was barely a whisper. Sure. How else would you get good footage for Shark Week? Maya pulled up some clips from recent documentaries. See, here's a researcher touching a great white's nose to demonstrate tonic immobility. And here's someone freediving with a tiger shark to study its behavior. Oh, and this is my favorite. It's a sanctuary where people can wade in the water with nurse sharks. Kids love it. The medical drones were now working overtime as student after student succumbed to species-specific versions of fainting. Even Professor Zexelk had gone an interesting shade of pale lavender, but Brix's voice was shaking so hard their crystal structure was creating a light show. How can your species be so brave? Maya suggested innocently. Insane. The entire conscious portion of the class shouted in unison. Maya just smiled. Would it help if I told you that sharks aren't even in the top 10 most dangerous animals on Earth? The sound of Kurixa fainting again echoed through the lecture hall like wind chimes in a hurricane. After a brief recess to allow the medical drones to distribute calming supplements to the class, Professor Zexelk had managed to convince most students to return to their seats, though Maya noticed that everyone had somehow migrated to the back rows, leaving her alone at the front with her holographic presentation. Now, Maya said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, I should probably tell you about one of the most famous shark incidents in human history. It might help you understand why we respect these creatures, but don't necessarily fear them. There's a difference, squeaked one of the Mantis students, still clutching their comfort blanket. Oh yes, Maya nodded. Let me tell you about the U.S. Indianapolis. The hologram shifted to show an old Earth military vessel. In 1945, this ship was torpedoed in the Pacific Ocean. Around 900 sailors went into the water. And yes, there were sharks. Even Professor Zexelk's tentacles had gone still, all 5 eyes fixed on Maya. For 4 days, these sailors floated in open ocean, in what became one of the worst shark incidents in recorded history. The sharks were mostly oceanic whitetips, drawn to the disturbance in the water. Maya's voice was solemn now. Of the 900 sailors who went into the water, only 316 survived. The class was dead silent. Even the atmospheric processors seemed to have quieted. However, Maya continued, and this is the important part. Most of those deaths weren't from shark attacks. The majority of sailors died from exposure, dehydration, and drowning. The sharks were opportunistic, not malicious. That's supposed to be comforting. Terexase chimed quietly, their crystal structure still slightly dim from their earlier fainting spell. Actually, yes, Maya nodded. Because it taught us something important about sharks. They're not mindless killing machines. They're predators doing what predators do. Once we understood that, we could learn to coexist with them. She clicked to the next slide, showing a massive prehistoric jaw. Now, if you want to talk about mindless killing machines, let me tell you about Megalodon, the shark that actually went extinct because it was too good at killing things, who had just managed to regain their proper gelatinous form, began to lose cohesion again. Megalodons were basically great whites scaled up to the size of a small spacecraft. Maya explained enthusiastically, their teeth were the size of human hands, and they hunted whales. Not modern whales, ancient whales that were themselves apex predators. We found fossil whale skeletons with megalodon teeth marks in them, and these existed on your world. Professor Zexelk asked faintly, while your species was... Oh no, Maya laughed. They went extinct long before humans came along. But you know what's really interesting? Some of our ancestors might have seen them. The confused silence prompted her to continue. See, some scientists think megalodons might have survived until about 3.6 million years ago. By then, some of our early hominid ancestors were already around. Imagine being an early human, just figuring out how to use tools and seeing a shadow the size of a spacecraft pass under your fishing raft. One of the gaseous students managed to ask, your ancestors went out on the water, knowing these things existed? Well, yeah, Maya shrugged. We had to eat. Besides, going into the water was probably safer than staying on land back then. You should hear about what we had to deal with there. No. The entire class shouted in unison. Even Professor Zexelk's tentacles made a cutting. Are you sure? Maya grinned. Because I haven't even told you about the time humans almost hunted great whites to extinction because we thought they were too dangerous, then realized we needed them and started protecting them instead. You protected them. T-Rex's voice was barely a whisper. Deliberately, of course. They're essential to our ocean ecosystems. We even have international laws protecting them now. Some humans dedicate their entire lives to shark-like dedication to preserving apex predators, Professor Zigzilk mused, their tentacles slowly unknotting. Perhaps we have underestimated your species' complexity. Oh, that's nothing. Maya waved dismissively. Wait until you hear about the people who study active volcanoes, or the ones who jump out of perfectly good spacecraft for fun, or, Professor, Terexe interrupted desperately. I believe it's time for our scheduled break. Indeed, Professor Zigzilk agreed quickly, their tentacles already reaching for what looked suspiciously like alien anti-anxiety medication. We'll resume in, shall we say, several hours, perhaps after some thorough meditation. Maya watched with amusement as her classmates practically fled the lecture hall. Only Professor Zigzilk remained, still staring at the holographic megalon tooth, Student Chen. They said finally, I believe I owe you an apology for my earlier dismissal of Earth's evolutionary challenges. Maya smiled. No apology needed, Professor, though if you're interested, I could prepare a presentation about some of our land predators for next week. Have you ever heard of something called a honey badger? The sound of the professor's hastily retreating tentacles echoed through the empty lecture hall. The next day, Maya arrived at class to find the lecture hall had been completely rearranged. All the seats had been pushed back an extra 3 meters from the presentation area, and someone had installed what appeared to be emergency force field generators around each desk. The praying mantis students had formed a prayer circle and were burning what smelled suspiciously like anti-predator incense. Blorp had encased themselves in a protective transparent shell while Terexa's crystal structure was vibrating at a frequency that supposedly helped with trauma recovery. Ah, Student Chen. Professor Zigzilk greeted her, all 5 eyes blinking nervously. We were just discussing yesterday's illuminating presentation. Several students have submitted formal requests to transfer to the theoretical xenobiology program, where they won't have to deal with actual creatures. Maya tried not to laugh as she took her seat, which, she noticed, was now the only one in the front row. That seems a bit extreme. I mean, sharks are fascinating, but they're really not the scariest things on Earth. A collective whimper echoed through the classroom. Not the scariest? ZZZ's environmental suit fogged up with anxiety. What could possibly be more terrifying than an apex predator that can detect a single drop of blood in millions of liters of water? Maya grinned. Well, since you asked, she pulled out her data pad. Would you like to hear about the inland taipan? It's a snake that can kill 100 people with a single bite. Or maybe the box jellyfish, which has 24 eyes and tentacles loaded with millions of microscopic harpoons filled with neurotoxin. The medical drones began preemptively hovering near the more sensitive students. Or we could talk about the saltwater crocodile, which has the strongest bite force of any living animal and actively hunts humans for food. Oh, or there's the Brazilian wandering spider, which is not only deadly venomous, but also gives human males extremely painful 4-hour. Student Chen. Professor Zigzilk's tentacles had tied themselves into what looked like an advanced macrame project. Perhaps we should focus on less lethal aspects of Earth's biodiversity. But that's what I'm trying to explain, Maya said earnestly. Earth isn't special because it has dangerous creatures. Every world does. Earth is special because of how we've learned to understand and coexist with them. The class fell silent, even the mantis students' prayer circle pausing mid-chant. Think about it, Maya continued. Humans don't have natural weapons or defenses. We can't regrow limbs like sharks regrow teeth. We can't sense electricity or smell a drop of blood from a kilometer away. We don't have venom or claws or protective shells. Then how? Terex's chimes were barely audible. How did you survive? Maya's smile turned surprisingly gentle. We learned. We studied. We understood. Every predator on Earth taught us something. Sharks taught us to respect the ocean's power, but also its beauty. Snakes taught us about medicine. Some of our best painkillers come from venom research. Even the deadliest creatures helped us become who we are. Professor Zixel's tentacles slowly began to unknot. A fascinating perspective. You're suggesting that Earth's hostile environment fostered not just physical adaptation, but intellectual evolution. Exactly. Maya beamed. We didn't become spacefaring because we were the strongest or fastest or had the best natural weapons. We did it because we had to understand everything around us to survive. And once you understand something, you no longer fear it as much. Blorp finished softly, their protective shell beginning to dissolve. And we figured out how to make really big explosions. Maya added cheerfully. But that's a presentation for another day. The sound of Trixie fainting again was almost drowned out by Professor Zixel's hastily shouted, "Class dismissed." As her classmates fled the lecture hall, for the third time in 2 days, Maya caught sight of something interesting on one of the Mantis students' data pads. They had drawn a new picture of a shark, but this time, instead of looking terrified, the artist had added a small note, "Fascinating creatures." From a safe distance, her progress, Maya thought with a grin. Just wait until they hear about honey badgers